Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. Picture this: a gleaming mansion in Victor's village, sitting on the edge of some forgotten district. The streets are empty. The lights are off. Snow is falling. But in one upstairs window, there's still a glow. One room, one Victor awake. No cameras, no cheering crowd. The games are over. So what's actually happening in that room now that the capital has turned the broadcast off? At face value, that mansion is the promise. You win. You get out. No more reaping, no more hunger, no more mines or lumber or factories. The capital hands you keys, a wardrobe, a pantry that never runs out. Freedom, right? But here's the real question. When did the capital ever give anything away without owning it completely? Winning the Hunger Games doesn't set you free. It signs your life away. From the moment you step off that train as a victor, you're not a person anymore. You're state property under a lifelong contract you never saw, with bodyguards who are really handlers and a phone line to the capital that only goes one direction. Any district kid watching thinks you escaped the arena. The capital knows you just moved into a prettier cage. Everyone talks about surviving the arena, but the real question is what happens the first time a victor says no? What happens when Haymitch skips a ceremony, or when Johanna refuses to play sweet for an interviewer, or when Finnick won't go to another private party full of rich strangers with dead eyes? The arena had a countdown. This contract doesn't. Here's the contradiction the story keeps hinting at. Victors are supposed to be symbols of hope and reward. So why are so many of them addicts, recluses, or written off as crazy? Why does District 12's glorious mentor drink himself unconscious? Why does a girl from 7 come back hard and furious, then end up stripped, tortured, and shaking at the sound of running water? If disobedient victors are such a problem, why doesn't the capital just kill them and pick a new hero? The reason is brutal and simple. A living warning is more useful than a dead one. There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between the capital and its trophies. This is where we talk about contracts that never end, bodyguards who report every word, talents that are really propaganda jobs, and the quiet system of sexual exploitation that turns Finnick O'Dare from golden boy into a weaponized secret keeper. In this video, we're going to cover what actually happens when a victor pushes back, the torture that doesn't make it onto television, the threats against families and whole districts, and the way Snow uses their trauma to keep the games going long after the arena explodes. By the end, that one lit window in Victor's village won't look safe at all. It'll look like the start of a darker game. From Victory Parade to Prison Walk, why post-games life is the real arena. Winning the Hunger Games earns you a parade. Winning the Hunger Games also earns you a permanent escort to the bathroom. On screen, the victory tour is roses, confetti, and 12 districts pretending they're thrilled to host the person who survived their children. At face value, it looks generous. Feasts in every square, new clothes, a shining train, and then the big payoff, a key to Victor's village. But here's the real question. Why does the capital spend so much on a victor after the cameras should be done with them? Because the show isn't over. The minute you step off that train into Victor's village, the volume turns down in public and way up in private. The handlers don't go away, they move in. You get bodyguards who are supposedly there for your safety, but they never seem to be more than 2 steps away when you're near a phone, a camera, or a fence. You sign contracts you never saw before the arena, promising a lifetime of mentoring, interviews, and requests from the capital that somehow aren't optional. So why not just retire you in peace? Why not let the one person who survived the games fade into the background? There is a lot to uncover here. Snow needs victors alive because they are walking proof that the games can be beaten. A kid from some starving district outsmarted the arena the capital built. That part matters because it creates a dangerous relationship between victory and hope. So the solution isn't to erase you, it's to own you. Notice where the punishments land first. When Haymitch uses the force field against the capital, they don't drag him off stage and execute him. They kill his family. When Johanna Mason wins by pretending to be weak, the story we're given is that her loved ones are murdered after the games. The message is simple. Your body is replaceable. Your influence is not. So why hurt the symbol when you can strangle everything it cares about instead? This is where we talk about the new arena. Once you're a victor, every mentoring choice is a move on a board you don't control. Do you help a tribute from your district too much and make them sympathetic? That can be punished. Do you freeze in an interview or worse, say something that sounds a little too honest about the capital? Suddenly your escort is nervous, your schedule changes, and your mother's house is under extra protection. In universe, this matters because victors are the only district citizens with both mass visibility and proof the capital system has cracks. One rebellious coal miner can be disappeared. One rebellious victor has already been on every screen in Panem. So Snow turns them into living warnings. Finnick paraded as a beautiful weapon, Haymitch written off as a drunk, Johanna broken by torture. Ever wondered why so many victors are addicts, recluses, or branded as crazy? That's not an accident. By tracking what happens when victors disobey, we watch an authoritarian state do something especially chilling. It takes hope, the promise that winning means safety, and repackages it as terror. If even the winners aren't free, what does that say to everyone else? And in the next section, we're going to cover exactly how Snow enforces that message, one disobedient victor at a time. The illusion of safety, our core theory of Victor's village. So let's zoom in on the place that's supposed to prove the promise is real. Victor's village. At face value, it's perfect. You win the games, you get a mansion, hot water, more food than your whole district sees in a month, and a permanent escape from the reaping. It looks like retirement. It sounds like safety. But here's the real question. Why does the capital pour so many resources into housing a handful of traumatized teenagers in every single district? If you treat it as a reward, none of it fully makes sense. If you treat it as a beautifully staged holding pen, suddenly the design snaps into focus. Victor's Village is where the capital parks its most dangerous assets. People who have killed, inspired hope, and proven they can beat the odds on live television. That part matters because you don't just let those people wander around unsupervised. You build them a gilded cage. So what's the promise versus the reality? On paper, victors gain freedom from labor, guaranteed income, and physical security. In practice, they lose almost everything else. They're bound into lifelong contracts, mandatory mentoring, propaganda shoots, capital parties, talents they're expected to perform on demand. They get bodyguards who double as handlers. They get phones that connect straight to the capital, which sounds prestigious until you realize Snow can call you at any hour with an order you can't refuse. We're going to cover this whole system through one lens: control. Mentoring isn't just tradition, It keeps victors emotionally tied to the games, so the trauma never scabs over. The victory tour isn't just celebration, it parades them as both prize and warning through every district. Finnick's prostitution, Johanna's forced parties, Haymitch's televised drunkenness, these aren't random cruelties, they're tools. Each role tightens the relationship between victor and capital until saying no isn't a choice, it's a death sentence for someone you love. And that raises the central question for this section. When does a victor stop being a symbol of hope and become a tool of terror? Katniss is the obvious example. Her berry stunt gives her district hope, so Snow turns her into a walking threat. Behave, or the girl on fire burns for you. Haymitch's defiance in his own games gets his family killed. Then he's left alive as the drunk mentor everyone pities. Ever wondered why so many victors are addicts, recluses, or crazy? That's not an accident. It's policy. There is a lot to uncover here, so we're going to map the full life cycle of a disobedient victor. The first refusal, the quiet threat, the public punishment, and in some cases, the final erasure. This is where we talk about book canon, movie choices, and careful speculation working together. From the contracts you never see signed, to the empty houses left standing after District 12 burns, every detail points to the same conclusion. The real arena doesn't end at the victor's village gates. So what actually happens the moment a victor tells the capital no? In the next section, we follow that decision step by step and watch how Snow turns one act of defiance into a lesson for an entire nation. Tonight's game plan, how we're dismantling the capital's reward system, so to map out how that no actually plays out, we need a game plan of our own. Tonight we're going to cover the entire pipeline of a victor's life after the arena. From the moment the crown hits their head, to the moment the capital decides they're more useful broken than celebrated. First, we roll the clock back. You think about those early games, when a winner just went home to whatever was left of their district, no mansion, no private square, no cameras parked in their front yard. So why the change? This is where we talk about the invention of Victor's Village as a system. We'll look at Snow stepping in after the chaos of the dark days, designing these suburbs so every child can see the promise of escape, and every adult can see exactly who the capital owns now. At face value, it's real estate. In practice, it's architecture as a leash. From there, we zoom in on the fine print you never see, the contracts, the bodyguards who are really handlers, the talents and media tours that sound glamorous until you realize they're mandatory. We'll break down how those rules are built to tempt you first. No more reaping, hot showers, food that isn't grey, and then trap you when you hesitate. Why does a victor end up on a train to the capital for parties that never quite end? Why do some of them come back quieter, more vacant, or suddenly rich in a way that feels wrong? There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between reward and punishment. Then we get specific. Haymitch, who outsmarted the arena and watched the capital erase everyone he loved in response. Finnick turned into a weapon of desire for powerful clients, paying in secrets instead of cash. Johanna, who played sweet to win and then had her family executed once the act stopped serving Snow's story, will walk through how torture, public humiliation, addiction, and accidents become the informal rulebook for what happens when a victor bends the script. Here's the real question. If the games are supposed to end, why does the suffering escalate after you win? After that, we pull the camera back out. How does Victor's Village work in a lumber district versus a luxury goods district? Does District 1's village feel more like a gated community, while 11's is a fenced-off anomaly in the fields? We'll compare what the books show us to what the films soften or skip, and ask what we're missing because our point of view is stuck in District 12's tiny hilltop suburb. That part matters because the horror is uneven on purpose. And finally, we're going speculative. What rebellions are happening in those other empty houses? Which lesser-known victors are quietly sabotaging training, throwing interviews, or feeding information to rebels? When we reach the finale, we're going to ask you directly, in that mansion, with the capital watching and your district on the line, do you play along or risk everyone you love? If you're new to the village, welcome to the reaping after the reaping. So if you're standing in that mansion doorway, wondering how you got here and how any of this is allowed, this is where we talk about what this channel actually does. If you've somehow wandered into Victor's village for the first time, welcome to the reaping after the reaping. We live in that uncomfortable space between what the books and films show you on the surface and what the capital's paperwork, politics, and quiet threats would look like underneath. At face value, it's law. Underneath, it's a case study in power. We're going to cover all things Hunger Games, but not in a who's your favorite ship way. This channel is built around the systems. Why the games exist, why Snow restructures punishment over time, why a district that loses children every year still sends gifts and applause when a victor comes home. There is a lot to uncover here about the relationship between spectacle and control, and Victor's Village is one of the cleanest lenses to see it. So in most videos, you'll see us pull apart canon detail, adaptation choices, and political theory in the same breath. We'll zoom in on a throwaway line about Haymitch's contract, then zoom out to talk about what it means that the capital legally owns a victor's image, body, and future appearances until death. We'll ask why certain scenes vanish in the films, and what that erasure says about how the story of hope is being softened for an audience that isn't living in a district. This episode sits right in the middle of that niche. On the surface, it sounds like character gossip. Who disobeys, who breaks, who drinks, who rebels. But here's the real question. What does the capital need victors to be? Celebrities? Hostages? Living warnings? When we talk about Finnick being prostituted or Johanna having her family killed, that part matters because it shows how punishment is engineered, not improvised. If you're into long-form, lore-heavy breakdowns that treat Panem as a real political system, instead of just a backdrop, you're in the right district. You don't have to do anything right now. But if you want to be here when we map out individual victors' post-games lives, their contracts, their addictions, their quiet rebellions, you can hit subscribe and ring the bell so the algorithm actually lets you know when those go up. Pattern interrupt for you. This isn't the last stop. We're about to walk you through the village itself as if you were being escorted there the day after you win. From the early brutal games when victors were dumped back home with almost nothing, to the moment Snow starts building manicured suburbs and electric fences, we're going to track how the rules of this place evolve. So step through the gate. The tour of Victor's Village history starts right after those first experimental arenas. From Bloodbath to Blueprint, how early games forced the capital to rethink victory. Those first arenas, they didn't end with the train ride to a mansion. They ended with a train ride home to nothing. Back then, in the first decade of the games, the capital wasn't selling a story, it was delivering a warning. Starving kids thrown into makeshift arenas, barely any stylists, no parades, no interviews. The districts watched because they were forced to, not because anyone was fascinated. It was raw punishment beamed into every home, a yearly reminder of who had lost the war. At face value, that sounds efficient. You rebel, you lose, your children pay. But here's the real question. How long can pure terror carry a system that needs to last generations? Fear makes people freeze. It doesn't make them participate. It doesn't make a parent in District 7 secretly tell themselves, if my child is reaped, maybe there's a chance. Early victors exposed that problem immediately. The winners came home half-starved, missing limbs, visibly traumatized. No counseling, no steady income, no clear role, The capital put them on a train, paraded them once, and then dropped them back into the same shacks and mines they'd left. You think back to the early games when they'd send you home on a train with nothing. So why the change later? Because those victors weren't useful yet. They were living reminders that the games were unwinnable, that even if you survived, you were broken. There is a lot to uncover here about that relationship between punishment and propaganda. If the only visible outcome of victory is a maimed teenager drinking themselves to death in the seam, what message does that send to the next generation? Not hope, just horror. And that part matters because Snow doesn't just need obedience, he needs engagement. He needs districts to train tributes, to obsess over odds, to watch the broadcasts with a twisted sense of investment. He needs capital citizens to treat the games as a tradition, not a war crime. Terror alone can't do that. You need a promise. So the capital starts to realize victory needs an upgrade. Winning has to look, from a distance, almost desirable. Not just, you don't die, but you might get out. A better house, full cupboards, electricity that doesn't flicker. Parents needed to be able to tell themselves, if the worst happens, at least there's a path to something more than a grave. That's the psychological pivot we're going to cover in the next phase of the system. This is where we talk about standardization. You can't rely on random mayors or peacekeepers to decide how a victor lives. You build a physical institution that does it for you. Identical houses, a fenced-off enclave, a place where every district child can literally see the reward, but not touch it. Victor's Village becomes the blueprint that solves the early games' functional problem. Turn broken survivors into packaged symbols, concentrate them where the capital can watch, and turn terror into a controlled form of hope. But once you centralize your victors in neat little suburbs, you also create something the early games never had. You create a neighborhood full of people who know exactly what the capital is capable of. So what happens when that neighborhood starts comparing scars? Snow's big idea, turning survivors into state-owned celebrities. So when that neighborhood starts comparing scars, you get a problem the capital didn't have in the early years. You get veterans of the arena who can swap strategies, decode patterns, and realize the games are not random at all. This is where we talk about Snow. If you've read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, you've already seen the prototype. Young Coriolanus Snow watching those early clunky games and realizing something crucial. Fear alone isn't stable. The audience is bored, the districts are only terrified, and no one is invested in the outcome. So why keep funding a bloodbath no one actually wants to watch? Snow's answer is spectacle, sponsorships, turning tributes into characters you root for. Back then, he learns that if you dress the slaughter in story and promise, people will not only tolerate it, they'll participate. That part matters because Victor's Village is just that lesson turned into architecture. Here's the real question. What do you do with the survivors of your own horror show once they've seen behind the curtain? You can't erase them. Killing every victor would expose the games as a dead end, not a ladder. But you also can't let them go home as ordinary citizens, wandering around their district, telling the truth. Snow recognizes victors as a unique resource. They are proof that the games can be beaten, which makes them dangerous. But they're also proof that the system works, which makes them incredibly useful. So he solves it the way he always does, by reframing the relationship. At face value, Victor's Village is a reward. Mansions, hot water, full pantries in a world where your neighbors are starving. Children in the district can point to those houses on the hill and say, if I win, that's mine. We're going to cover the propaganda side more in another section, but notice the psychology here. The games stop being only a death sentence and become an opportunity, a twisted form of hope. But underneath the marble countertops, it's a containment strategy. By centralizing victors in one fenced-off enclave, Snow solves multiple problems at once. He showcases the prize, he separates victors from the poorer parts of the district, and he creates a controlled environment where every visitor, every shipment, every late-night light can be monitored. Remember how Katniss has a direct line to the capital in her new house? That's not customer service, that's a leash. Snow's real insight is that chains work better when they look like jewelry. Give a victor a legal contract, a security detail, mandatory mentoring duties, and you can say you're protecting an asset rather than owning a person. The mansion sells the dream to the district. The fine print locks the victor into lifelong service. And the chilling twist is this: the same man who gifts you that house is also writing the rules for how you can be punished when you step out of line. So what happens when a victor decides the mansion isn't worth the price and says no? After the 10th, the official birth of Victor's village as a control grid, what happens is the capital stops improvising and starts building. Right after the 10th games, when the spectacle shifts from barely organized punishment to polished national event, Snow and his planners do something new. They standardize the reward. No more ad hoc prizes, no more one-off gifts. Winning the Hunger Games earns you a mansion in Victor's village. At face value, that sounds generous. You think back to the early games when they'd send you home on a train with trauma and maybe a medal, and that was it. So why the change? Why pour concrete and resources into permanent housing for the very people who've survived the capital's favorite murder show? Here's the real question. What kind of government builds a suburb just for its most dangerous witnesses? This is where we talk about the design. Physically, every victor's village follows the same template, a neat ring or grid of identical upscale houses, usually 12, with paved streets, working power, real glass windows and space. Always set apart from the main district, but still visible, close enough that every child walking home through the mines or the fields can see the roofs, far enough that almost none of them will ever touch the doors. That part matters because the village is an advertisement you can't turn off. The capital wants every district to point at those houses and say, "See, there's hope. One in thousands might escape." It turns the games from pure terror into a twisted lottery. You're not just avoiding death, you're chasing the promise of heat in winter, full cupboards, and a fence that keeps hunger out instead of keeping you in. But there is a lot to uncover here, because the hidden function is the exact opposite of escape. By grouping victors together in a standardized layout, the capital makes control scalable. You don't need to track one traumatized teenager in a crowded seam. You park a permanent peacekeeper unit at the entrance to the village. You install cameras on every corner. You control who enters, who leaves, and when. Now the bodyguards from earlier sections have a base of operations. Their presence is baked into the architecture. A victor doesn't just live in a nice house, they live in a monitored zone with predictable sightlines and fixed choke points. Even the distance from the main district is a calculation. Too close, and a victor can vanish into the crowd. Too far, and the propaganda value drops. So why does this matter for disobedience? Because once the physical grid is in place, the capital can start writing the psychological rules. You're surrounded by luxury, but also by peacekeepers. You can see your old street, but crossing that invisible line without permission becomes an act of rebellion. And when every door, every road, every visitor is controlled, what happens when a victor still decides to push back? In the next section, we're going to cover how the capital answers that question with punishments that turn Victor's village from a golden cage into an open-air warning. The fine print of survival, contracts, clauses, and invisible chains. Winning the Hunger Games earns you a mansion. It also signs your life away. You never see Katniss sit down and flip through a 30-page contract, but the moment that crown touches a victor's head, the terms kick in. At face value, it looks simple. You mentor, you smile for the cameras, you do a victory tour, and in return the capital keeps its promise of food and safety for your district. But here's the real question. Safety on whose terms? This is where we talk about the invisible fine print. Every opportunity is actually an obligation. Capital interviews aren't optional press. They're scheduled appearances with scripts you don't get to rewrite. Those glittering parties, mandatory attendance with your escort tracking who you talk to and what you say. The victory tour isn't a sentimental road trip. It's a traveling advertisement for obedience, and your job as victor is to sell the relationship between hope and submission. And then there are the clauses no one says out loud. The special requests Snow hints at with Finnick, with Johanna, with any attractive victor who suddenly becomes very popular in the capital's social scene. You're not just a champion, you're inventory. If a high-ranking citizen wants you at a private party, you go. If they want more than conversation, the system has already decided your answer. There is a lot to uncover here, because the games turn your body into a spectacle, and the contract makes sure the spectacle never ends. So how do they enforce a contract you never technically signed? With people. Your capital escort isn't just a guide, they're a handler reporting every mood swing and offhand comment. Your bodyguards are there to protect you from the public, and to protect the public from you. Peacekeepers stationed in or near Victor's village make sure your front gate only swings one way. Even the direct phone line to the capital is a leash dressed up as a luxury. Refuse one clause, and they don't start with you. Haymitch learns this when his clever arena strategy embarrasses the capital. His loved ones die for his ingenuity. Johanna's family disappears after she weaponizes vulnerability to win. When Katniss hesitates to play the star-crossed lover, Snow goes straight for Prim, for Gale, for the entire district. The message is painfully clear. Your survival is now a group project, and the capital can fail everyone else if you step out of line. So what does disobedience even look like when obedience is baked into your continued existence? That part matters because it explains why so many victors turn to addiction, to isolation, to craziness the capital is happy to broadcast. Is Haymitch drunk, or is he quietly mentoring in a way that keeps his tributes angry at the system, not at each other? Is Finnick flirting, or slipping secrets to rebels between smiles? We're going to cover those survival strategies next. But here's the unsettling twist. Every workaround a victor finds becomes a new clause for the capital to crush. What happens when the contract itself becomes the next arena? Tempt first, break later. How the capital recruits its own victims. When the contract becomes the arena, you have to ask, why would anyone ever step into it on purpose? Here's the real question. If the games are supposed to be punishment, why does Snow spend so much effort making victory look glamorous? Why build mansions, throw parades, and shower one traumatized teenager with more food than an entire district sees in a month? At face value, Victor's village looks generous. You win, you get a house, your family moves in, and the reaping can never touch you again. That part matters because it turns survival into a sales pitch. The capital doesn't just threaten you with death in the arena, it promises you a private world where the hunger and coal dust and fish guts never follow. Back then, in the earliest games, winning meant you went home alive, and that was basically it. No guaranteed income, no permanent security, just the honor of not being dead. So why the change? Snow wants a better class of tribute on screen. Stronger bodies, bigger personalities, people the capital audience can fall in love with, and the districts can envy. This is where we talk about bait. Victor's village is built where every child can see it, but almost no one can touch it. In District 12, the houses sit on a hill, with full power, hot water, and pantries that never run out. In wealthier districts, you can imagine polished stone, training rooms, imported fabrics. The relationship between those houses and the rest of the district is the whole point. Constant visual proof that the games can be your one-way ticket out. And slowly, it works. Districts 1, 2, and 4 don't just accept the games, they start feeding them. Kids train for years, dreaming of stepping into that arena on purpose. Volunteering stops being a desperate act and becomes a career move. Parents push their children toward the capital's cameras because the alternative, staying poor, anonymous and powerless, feels worse. Here's the twist. The more you want that reward, the more the capital owns you once you get it. A starving kid who never expected to live has very little to lose. A victor with a mansion, a protected family and a district depending on their sponsor gifts. They're trapped by their own winnings. Defy Snow, and he doesn't have to kill you. He just has to threaten the life you bled to create. That's why the temptations keep stacking. Mentoring sounds honorable. Media tours sound exciting. Even the whispered invitations to capital parties, to private rooms and special clients are framed as perks of fame. There is a lot to uncover here, but the pattern is clear. Volunteering, mentoring, and prostitution aren't glitches in the system. They are the system. Because once you understand how carefully the capital designs the temptation, you're ready to see the next stage. What happens when a victor stops playing along and the reward they chased becomes the weapon held to their throat? Volunteers by design. Why the capital needs you to step forward. So why even allow volunteers in the first place, if the whole point of the games is to punish the districts? On paper, a pure lottery would be colder, cleaner, more terrifying. 2 names, no escape, no choice. But here's the real question. Which is easier to control long term? Someone dragged in screaming, or someone who raised their hand in front of their entire district and said, "I'll go"? At face value, volunteering looks like mercy. A stronger teen steps in for a younger sibling. A trained career tribute spares some random kid from the seam. The capital can point to that and say, "See, we allow love, we allow sacrifice." But that part matters because it quietly rewires the emotional relationship every district has with the games. Once you can choose your tribute, you can also prepare them. You can train them, you can bet on them. Suddenly, the games aren't just a yearly trauma that happens to you. They're a season, a culture. In 1, 2, and 4 parents send kids to academies. Districts brag about their odds, and the reaping becomes less a dread lottery and more the opening ceremony to a sporting event. You get parades, feasts, the promise of victor's village if your tribute pulls it off. That is the brilliance. The capital turns punishment into something you're emotionally invested in winning. And once you volunteer, you've already agreed to the terms, whether you understood them or not. This is where we talk about control. A volunteer victor is the capital's favorite product. Someone who can be told, again and again, you chose this. You wanted the mansion, the food, the safety from future reapings. So when the contracts show up, when you're told mentoring is mandatory, propaganda tours are mandatory, it all gets framed as the reasonable price for your decision. We're going to cover the explicit punishments later, but notice how volunteering makes them hit harder. When Finnick is sold to capital elites, or when Johanna's family is killed after she outsmarts the arena, Snow isn't just punishing defiance. He's twisting the knife of choice. You volunteered. Your district trained you. They cheered when you came home. Now, if you step out of line, you're not just betraying the capital's generosity, you're betraying the pride your own people built around you. That's the real trap. A volunteer victor who disobeys can be paraded as a cautionary tale on every screen, the hero who turned on their own district's hope, and the districts watch, wondering if they misjudged their champion instead of questioning the system that set the rules. So if volunteering is a feature, not a bug, you have to ask, what other optional parts of a victor's life are actually engineered the same way, presented as choices, but designed to leave them with nowhere to run when they finally try to say no? District 12, the control group that refuses to play. So if so many parts of a victor's life are framed as choices, we need a control group. A district where nobody wants in, no one volunteers, no one is training from age 5. That's District 12. At face value, 12 looks irrelevant to Snow's grand design. It's poor, it's far, it sends coal and corpses. The games there are a death sentence, not a career path. You don't stand in that reaping square calculating odds and opportunity. You stand there hoping the odds forget your name. That part matters because it means the core promise behind Victor's Village, win, and your life transforms, is already broken before anyone steps on a train. Volunteering never took hold in District 12. That's our baseline. The relationship between child and arena is simple. You are reaped, you die. Even Katniss's volunteer moment is an anomaly, powered by panic, not ambition. So what does victory mean in a place that never wanted to play? Here's the real question. If no one is chasing the prize, can the prize still control them? Look at Haymitch. Look at Katniss. Neither of them ever wanted to be there. Neither trained for glory. They survive through stubbornness, trauma, and a refusal to cooperate with the narrative the Capitol keeps trying to sell. When Haymitch comes home, he doesn't become an aspirational figure. He becomes the town drunk. When Katniss returns, she's a symbol of defiance, not a Capitol success story. Their victory doesn't advertise the system. It exposes it. From Snow's perspective, that's a problem. Victor's Village in 12 sits on a hill, has power, hot water, food. The architecture is doing its best propaganda impression. But the people who live there are visibly broken, furious, or both. Kids in the seam don't point at Haymitch's house and dream. They point and whisper. We're going to cover how other districts buy into the fantasy. But in 12, the mansion is haunted on arrival. So the Capitol adjusts. If 12 won't play aspirational, it becomes exemplary in a different way. This is where we talk about punishment. When Haymitch uses the arena force field against the Capitol, Snow doesn't just fume, he has Haymitch's loved ones murdered. When Katniss refuses to sell a romance she doesn't believe in, Snow goes straight for her family, Gale's whipping, public humiliation tours, the constant threat hanging over the entire district. He can't sell hope here, so he weaponizes fear harder. Notice how creative it gets. The body is technically safe in Victor's Village, but every visit to the Hob, every hunting trip, every interaction with someone you care about becomes a risk the Capitol can exploit. 12's victors are less emotionally bound to the reward narrative, so Snow has to bind them with something else. Grief, guilt, and the knowledge that any misstep will land on someone else's neck. And because District 12 is the exception, it quietly reveals the rule. If this is what happens in the one district that never wanted volunteers, what does it look like in the places that do? When the kids beg to enter the games, when parents push them toward the arena, how much more powerful and more fragile does the Capitol's promise become? Hold on to that contrast, because once we move into the mid-tier and career districts, we're going to see what happens when victors start to resist a system they were raised to worship, and what Snow does when the control group stops being enough of a warning. Katniss the wrong kind of volunteer. When motives don't match the script, So when you move from career districts to District 12, something snaps. The whole volunteering system is supposed to be fueled by ambition, by the promise that if you win, the capital will make you untouchable. But Katniss, she steps forward for the one motive the capital can't safely monetize. She doesn't volunteer because she wants to be a victor. She volunteers because her sister is screaming. At face value, the capital can still stamp that as a win. A volunteer is a volunteer. The games get their spectacle. But here's the real question. What happens when the crowd isn't cheering for glory? They're watching a girl throw her own life away for someone weaker. That part matters because it swaps out the capital's currency. The hope on those faces isn't, maybe I'll be rich. It's maybe someone would do that for me. Career volunteering teaches you to worship the system. Katniss's volunteering teaches you to question it. Her reason is love, not reward, and love doesn't negotiate with contracts, sponsorship deals, or Snow's carefully managed relationship between risk and payoff. Suddenly, the arena becomes a story about personal sacrifice instead of capital mercy. So this is where we talk about the cover-up. Snow's first move is not to crush her, it's to reframe her. Cinna turns her into the girl on fire, but the capital tries to douse the politics by drowning her in romance. The star-crossed lovers narrative with Peter isn't just cute, it's a containment strategy. If Katniss is a love-struck teenager, then her volunteering wasn't defiance, it was just hormones with better costume design. We're going to cover how every public beat is steered that way. The stylists lean into softness. Caesar Flickerman keeps dragging interviews back to feelings. Even her tour appearances are choreographed to sell a relationship instead of a rebellion. The capital is basically saying, don't see a symbol, see a girl with a crush who got lucky in the arena. But what happens when she stops playing along? Pattern interrupt. Snow doesn't threaten her first. He threatens everyone else. Gale's whipping in the square, the peacekeepers raiding the hob, the quiet pressure on her mother and Prim. District 12's fence suddenly electrified. These are not random acts of cruelty. They're targeted reminders that the capital owns the people she stepped up to protect. When that still doesn't fix the problem, the punishment escalates. The bombing of District 12 leaves Victor's village standing as a kind of sick monument. Your house survives, your people don't. Prim's death in the capital isn't just battlefield tragedy, it's the final proof of Snow's rulebook. Disobedient victors aren't killed outright. The capital kills everything they love first, then lets them live in the ruins. And Katniss shows you the cost of that rule. Her volunteering breaks the script, so the capital rewrites the ending around her, one body at a time. In the next section, we'll see how that same pattern plays out with victors who never volunteered at all, and why their rewards in Victor's village are designed to make sure no one ever follows Katniss's example again. The invisible middle, what we're not shown in Districts 5, 6, 9, and 10. So if Katniss blows up the script in 12, what's happening in all the districts we never really see? You know there's a Victor's village in 5, in 6, in 9 and 10. But here's the real question. What does winning look like in places the narrative barely visits? At face value, the story keeps you in the extremes. The absolute bottom in 12 and the glittering nightmare of the capital. That part matters because it creates a blind spot. We don't walk the streets outside District 6's train station. We don't see kids in District 9 staring up at those empty Victor mansions. So our relationship to Victor's village is filtered through Katniss's experience, when there is a lot to uncover here about the so-called middle. This is where we talk about the morphling victors from 6. They're our biggest clue. By the time they reach the quarter quell, they're skeletal, shaking, barely able to function without their drug. That's not just personal weakness. That's a pattern. A victor from a transport district shuttled constantly to the capital for parties and propaganda is going to have easy access to painkillers, to gifts, to anything that keeps them compliant. You win the games, and the reward is a lifetime prescription for forgetting. So what does district culture look like around that? In a place without full career academies, but with a real statistical hope that someone might win every decade or so, Victor's Village becomes a weird double symbol. On one hand, it's a carrot, a visible promise that if you survive, you get out of the factories or the fields forever. On the other, you watch your victor stumble through the square, slurring through capital talking points, and you understand the cost. Imagine District 9. Grain, starvation, and somewhere on a hill, a fenced-off row of houses with full pantries. Kids are told, train hard, you could live there. But they also see their victor hauled onto the Justice Building balcony, every reaping to cheer, while 2 more children are sent to die. The relationship between hope and horror is right there in the architecture. And when a mid-tier victor resists, the punishments probably don't look as theatrical as what we see with Katniss, but they're just as precise. Public shaming in the square if they refuse to mentor properly. Forced appearances in capital broadcasts, repeating the approved narrative until their voice cracks. Quiet visits from peacekeepers, reminding them that their siblings still walk home alone from the factory. We're going to cover the big, obvious rebellions in other sections. But here the rebellion is small and almost invisible. A mentor in District 5 accidentally miscoaches a tribute so they die quickly instead of suffering. A victor in 10 trains their kid to throw the games, to stay away from alliances that would make them interesting to the audience. A morphling in 6 overdoses on purpose the night before a tour stop. How many of those quiet choices are happening off-page in those unseen villages, and how many never make it to any official record at all? Careers in a cage. Why Districts 1, 2, and 4 are the system working perfectly? And then you zoom out from those quiet, hidden acts of resistance and hit the places where the system doesn't look broken at all. Districts 1, 2, and 4, the so-called career districts. On paper, they're the capital's success story. This is where we talk about kids who train for the games the way you might train for an exam. You grow up in a weapons academy, you learn to throw spears before you learn your letters, and when the reaping comes, you don't dread your name being pulled. You're fighting for the chance to volunteer. At face value, it looks voluntary, ambitious, even glamorous. Why fear the games when the games are your career path? Here's the real question. Why does the capital need those districts to be so eager? The reason is that they turn the horror of the arena into a promise. In 1, 2, and 4, becoming a victor is sold as social mobility. Your family gets better housing, your district gets extra food, celebrations, that glow of reflected glory. The relationship between tribute and capital shifts from prey and predator to something that feels more like a contract. And Victor's Village there, totally different vibe from 12's haunted cul-de-sac. In a career district, those mansions are occupied, lit, and toured in school field trips. Parents point and say, train hard, and that can be you. There is a lot to uncover here, because the village isn't a warning, it's an advertisement. The empty houses don't read as graves. They read as opportunities waiting for the next champion. That part matters because the capital reinforces it with special privileges. Informal training centers are technically illegal, but everyone knows peacekeepers look the other way in 1, 2, and 4. Sponsors from the capital already have their eyes on promising kids before they ever step onto the train. The odds feel tilted, but in your favor, which is exactly how Snow wants hope to function. So when those tributes win, the post-games chains are easier to sell. Mentoring every year, of course that's just giving back. Endless capital parties, that's networking. prostitution and private appointments with high-ranking clients. In a twisted way, it gets framed as the price of fame, part of the deal you signed when you raised your hand to volunteer. If you complain, the capital can shrug and say, "You wanted this." But what happens when even the poster children stop playing along? Finnick O'Dare is the perfect example, the golden boy of District 4, adored by the capital then quietly trading secrets for survival. Johanna Mason from 7 isn't technically a career, but she's close enough to expose the same lie. Once she starts pushing back, her family disappears. Suddenly, the contract looks more like a hostage situation, and because careers are supposed to be loyal, their rebellion is uniquely dangerous. If the districts that believe in the games start questioning the promise, the whole structure shakes. So the capital's response has to be brutal, public, and undeniable. The real twist is how far they're willing to go to make that example, and which victors they choose to break first. Why not just kill them? The meta question the capital wants you not to ask. The real twist is how far they're willing to go to make that example, and which victors they choose to break first. So here's the blunt version you're not supposed to say out loud. Why not just kill them? If a victor becomes that dangerous, why doesn't the capital quietly arrange an accident? A sudden illness, a train derailment, a tragic fire in Victor's village. In a system that can rig an entire arena, faking a death certificate is not the hard part. At face value, that seems efficient. Problem solved, threat removed, no messy rebellion. But here's the real question. What kind of system does that create for everyone watching from the districts? Imagine an alternative Hunger Games. Same reaping, same arena, but there are no winners, no mansions, no victor's village on the hill. Every year, 24 kids go in and 24 die, and maybe the capital throws in a few public executions just to keep the fear sharp. Total terror. No promise of escape at all. On paper, that sounds even scarier, right? Except politically, it's a disaster. Because if you're in the district and you know you're doomed no matter what do? You stop playing. You stop hoping your kid might be the 1 in 1,000 who makes it home. You stop believing in the relationship between obedience and survival. You get desperate, and desperate people are bad at staying in line. There is a lot to uncover here, but the short version is, when you have nothing to lose, rebellion stops being a risk and starts being the only rational move. A pure terror system gives every potential rebel the same calculation Katniss reaches much later. They're going to kill us anyway. So Snow doesn't run a pure terror system. He runs a hope and terror hybrid. That part matters because it explains why the capital keeps victors alive even when they hate him. Victor's village is the hardware, but the real program is psychological. A living victor is a billboard. They walk through the district as proof the games work, proof that the capital keeps its promise, at least on the surface. Survive the arena, get the house, get the food, get your family out of the worst of it. But that same victor is also a warning label. You've seen what happens when they step out of line. Haymitch's loved ones murdered after he outsmarts the force field. Johanna's family gone when she refuses to play the capital's beauty pageant. Finnick smiling on camera while being sold off to capital elites. Kill them quietly and the story ends. Keep them alive, controlled, and broken, and the story keeps playing on a loop in every district. This is where we talk about Snow's favorite subject, hope. Because to really understand why disobedient victors are paraded, punished, and never simply erased, we're going to cover how the capital turns a little hope into a leash, and why that leash has to stay visible. Hope on a leash, Snow's political theory of Victor's village. Snow actually tells us the whole blueprint himself. In that conversation with Seneca Crane, he trims his perfect white roses and explains that fear isn't enough. You can't run a nation on terror alone. People burn out, they break, or they revolt. So he drops the line that runs under the entire franchise: hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective. A lot of hope is dangerous. Here's the real question. What does that speech have to do with a cul-de-sac of empty mansions in each district? At face value, Victor's village looks generous. Win the games, get a house, endless food, hot water, a fence between you and the starving crowd. Kids in the seam can literally point at those roofs and say, "If I become a victor, my family eats." That part matters because it turns the arena from a death sentence into a twisted scholarship program. The capital doesn't just threaten you with the games, it sells you on them. We're going to cover how every brick of those mansions is built out of that little hope. The feasts, the victory tour, the cameras following a victor as they hug their mayor and hand out food, that's the visible promise. The relationship the capital wants is simple. You suffer, you entertain, and if you survive, you get out. Not out of the system, just out of the minds. So where does punishment fit into this theory? This is where we talk about conditional hope. When a victor disobeys, the capital almost never erases them quietly. Instead, it weaponizes the very reward it advertised. Haymitch wins by outsmarting the force field, so Snow has his family murdered and leaves him alive in his big empty house, drowning in alcohol and surveillance. Finnick is adored as the capital's golden boy, then turned into a commodity, his privileges tied directly to how obediently he sells his body and smiles on cue. The message to every district is brutal and clear. The mansion, the food, the safety from the reaping are real, but only as long as you play your part. Hope isn't revoked, it's put on a leash. Psychologically, that's a trap. If you're a hungry 12-year-old, what feels more realistic? Overthrowing the capital, or maybe becoming the next victor and moving your siblings into one of those houses? Rebellion means risking everything. Playing along means there's at least a narrow, horrible path where you win. The capital wants you hoping to survive the games, not hoping to end them. And every disobedient victor becomes a calibration tool in Snow's experiment. Johanna's torture, Annie's instability, the way the quarter quell reaping yanks former champions back into the arena. All of it adjusts the dial between hope and fear. Too much fear, and the districts snap. Too much hope, and they organize. So Snow keeps Victor's village standing as proof that the promise still exists, while parading broken victors through it as proof that the promise can be revoked. In the next section, we'll see what happens when that careful balance finally breaks, and why the quarter quell is where the leash slips. Mansions, feasts, and empty streets. The visible rewards that hide the knife. So when that balance between hope and fear starts to crack, the capital doesn't just tighten the leash in abstract. It tightens it in brick, heat, and running water. Picture District 12 in winter. The seam is freezing, smoke barely rising from half-collapsed roofs. Then, just up the hill, you have Victor's village. Wide cleared streets, working street lamps, and a perfect row of mansions with stocked pantries and roaring fireplaces. At face value, it's a reward. Your eyes are supposed to go, win the games, get that. But here's the real question. Why put that mansion right on the edge of a starving district instead of in the capital itself? This is where we talk about visibility. The capital wants every child walking home from the mines or the fields to see that empty, glowing house and understand the promise, not of collective safety, of individual escape. One victor, one golden ticket. The relationship between those heated rooms and the cold shacks below is the whole point. The wealth only exists because almost everyone else has nothing. And it doesn't stop at the property line. When a victor comes home, the district gets parades, banners, and for one day the peacekeepers hand out bread instead of beatings. In 12, we see the feast in the square, the special rations, the way people who have never tasted sugar suddenly have frosting on their tongues. For a moment, the games feel generous. Snow is literally feeding the district through the victor's body count. There is a lot to uncover here, because those celebrations rewire the stakes. Your district doesn't just hope someone survives. They hope someone wins big enough to trigger more food, more coal quotas eased, more medicine. The reason that matters is subtle. Now if you as a victor step out of line, it doesn't just feel you're defying the capital, it feels you're threatening future feasts, future parcels, future chances for your siblings' names to be pulled, and still be worth it. So, the pressure flips inward. Why is Haymitch a drunk? Partly trauma, sure, but also decades of being the man everyone blames when their tributes die and the rations don't come. Any hint of disobedience from him can be framed as the reason 12 stays hungry. That part matters because it lets Snow punish a whole district and say, talk to your victor. Over time, the architecture itself becomes a threat. In the books, as the years pass and no one wins from 12, those perfect houses stay empty. Vines creep up the walls, paint peels, but the power still works. Victor's village turns into a ghost town you have to walk past on your way to the hob, a physical scoreboard of how many children went in and never came out. And when 12 is bombed, what survives? Not the seam, not the square, the village. The mansions stand almost untouched, a burned-out district wrapped around a pristine capital investment. It's a message. Your people are disposable. Your potential victors are not. So why keep pouring resources into these empty suburbs instead of fixing the districts? Because the capital's goal isn't to improve anyone's life. It's to keep the hope of personal rescue alive, just enough that no one reaches for collective liberation. Victors become both the excuse for rewards and the scapegoats for crackdowns. If a district behaves, Snow can point to the warm houses and say, see, the system works. If they rebel, he can point to the same houses and say, you had your chance. The real twist is what happens when a victor stops playing their role in that script, when the mansion's owner starts using that visibility against the capital instead of for it. Because once the village ghost town starts to fill with rebels instead of role models, the entire logic of the games turns inside out, and Snow has to switch from dangling rewards to designing punishments. So what does that punishment look like when a victor finally says no? In the next section, we're going inside those mansions, behind the cameras, and into the specific ways the capital breaks the people it can't afford to kill. Yet, Haymitch Abernathy, the capital's manual on how to break a victor. Winning the Hunger Games earns you a mansion in Victor's Village. Haymitch Abernathy proves it can also earn you a personalized instruction manual on how to be destroyed. This is where we talk about the cost of being too clever. Back in his second quarter quell, Haymitch doesn't just survive the arena, he breaks it. He figures out the force field's timing, weaponizes the capital's own tech, and turns that shimmering wall into a boomerang that kills the last tribute for him. On camera, in front of the entire country, the arena, the game maker's pride, becomes his final ally. At face value, it's brilliant strategy. But here's the real question. What happens in a system built on fear when a teenager publicly outsmarts the system itself? You can't replay that games without reminding every district that the arena is flawed, that the capital can be beaten with brains instead of brute force. So Snow does what Snow always does. He edits the story. The books tell us the immediate response is not a medal, not a quiet threat, but a massacre. Haymitch's mother, his younger brother, his girlfriend, murdered in District 12 after he comes home. Number announcement. No trial. Just sudden absence that everyone in the scene can do the math on. That part matters because it clarifies the relationship between Victor and Capital. Your life is technically yours, but every life around you is collateral. Why not just kill Haymitch too? Why leave the boy who humiliated the arena alive? Because dead, he's a martyr. Alive, he's a warning. We're going to cover how that plays out over decades. He's forced into lifelong mentoring, dragged back to the capital year after year as a kind of running joke. The drunk from 12 who can't stand up straight on Caesar's couch. The cameras frame him as pathetic, unreliable, a punchline instead of a precedent. But under the jokes, notice the structure. He's isolated in Victor's village, in a district where he's the only winner for 24 years. He has a capital phone line. He's required to train new tributes, to ride the train, to sit with escorts and peacekeepers who report everything. You can feel the surveillance even in the silences between his scenes. So why the bottle? The fandom sometimes treats Haymitch's alcoholism as a character quirk, but in universe, it's strategy and scar tissue at the same time. He drinks to forget the arena, to numb the punishment Snow delivered through his family, to live with sending child after child back to die. And for the capital, an addict is perfect. An addict can be dismissed on air. An addict's warning sounds slurred. His anger can be blamed on withdrawal instead of politics. Every time he pushes back, the pattern repeats. Mentor too hard? Your tributes suffer. Help Katniss and Peter sell a double suicide romance that threatens the game's authority. Suddenly the peacekeepers in 12 get meaner, floggings get public, Gale ends up in the square. The capital doesn't need to execute Haymitch when it can execute outcomes. So when you watch him stumbling through that big empty house in Victor's village, you're not just seeing a broken man, you're seeing Snow's long-term experiment in controlled defiance. A Victor kept alive just enough to prove that outsmarting the arena doesn't mean you've escaped it. And Haymitch is only the first draft. In the next section, we'll look at what happens when the capital refines this method on other Victors and starts turning their bodies, not just their minds, into weapons. Finnick O'Dare, Golden Boy, leashed weapon. Haymitch is the first draft. Finnick O'Dare is the polished version the capital actually wants you to see. On screen, he's everything the games promise a Victor can become. You step off the train into the capital, and there he is, charming, half-naked, dripping sugar cubes and confidence. At face value, Finnick is the poster boy for Victor's village, working exactly as advertised. He's rich, he's adored. People in every district know his name, and capital citizens treat him like a celebrity more than a survivor. But here's the real question. If victory really means freedom, why does Finnick talk about secrets the way other people talk about weapons? There is a lot to uncover here, because Finnick is the clearest case of how the capital turns a victor's body into both product and punishment. Publicly, he's the golden boy. Privately, he's property. After his games, Snow doesn't just hand him a mansion, he hands him a schedule. Finnick is sold to high-ranking capital clients, passed around elite parties, and the relationship is never voluntary, no matter how flirtatious he acts. The contract is simple. Do what we say or the people you love back in District 4. That part matters because it explains why he plays along so convincingly. Why doesn't Finnick ever just say no? Because Snow has Annie Cresta. He has Finnick's family. The capital doesn't need visible chains when it can threaten to throw Annie back into her own private arena every time he hesitates. His desirability becomes a tool of control. The more the capital wants him, the more leverage Snow has. Refusing a client isn't just bad manners, it's a death sentence for someone who never volunteered for any of this. So Finnick builds a mask. The constant flirting, the jokes, the casual way he drapes himself over people in the training center. This is where we talk about survival as performance. You, as a viewer, might read it as confidence. In universe, it's armor. Underneath, he's a man who's been coerced for years, whose sense of self is eroded every time his body is treated as capital property. No wonder his real intimacy is with a rope and knots, something he can control with his own hands. And yet, he doesn't stay quiet forever. When Finnick starts reciting capital secrets on live TV, Snow's poison, the disappeared, the truth about what victors endure, that's not just drama. It's open rebellion from someone who knows exactly how many powerful clients are listening. The reason it hits so hard is because you realize if Finnick is talking, he's already decided he's not getting out alive. Which brings us to the quarter quell. Was his inclusion really random? Snow has a victor who knows too much, has begun to turn against the system, and is still adored by the capital audience. Sending Finnick back into the arena solves several problems at once. It punishes his disobedience, removes a dangerous witness, and sends a warning to every other victor being used the same way. Even the golden boy can be thrown away. So if that's what happens to the capital's favorite, what do they do to the victors who refuse to play pretty at all? Johanna Mason, when outwitting the capital gets your family killed. Johanna Mason answers that question. Because on paper, she does everything the capital says it wants. She wins the games. She gives them drama. She survives. But here's the real question. What happens when you win in a way that exposes how fake the whole performance really is? Johanna's year in the arena is brutal, but not flashy. She goes in presenting as the classic soft target, scared, unthreatening, supposedly out of her depth. You've seen this archetype before in the games. The tribute you underestimate. Then, once the bloodbath thins the field and the cameras have chosen their favorites, she turns. She drops the act, reveals she can fight, and methodically takes out the remaining competition. It's clever. It's efficient. It's not cute. At face value, that sounds like a winning narrative. Underdog outsmarts the field, right? But that part matters because the capital doesn't just want a victor, it wants a story it can sell, a relationship between audience and tribute built on spectacle, romance, or noble sacrifice. Johanna's strategy says, you were stupid to believe what you saw. You got played. And the capital really does not enjoy being publicly fooled. So the rumor spreads. After she gets home, Johanna's family is killed. No public execution, no official statement, just gone. The reason is never confirmed in text, but everything about Snow's established pattern points one way. This is Haymitch all over again. You embarrass the capital with an unscripted win. They take the people you love and leave you alive to feel it. It's punishment and policy at the same time. And this is where we talk about her post-games Johanna, the one you actually meet. The victor with no filter, who curses in public, rolls her eyes at capital fashion, strips in the elevator just to make everyone uncomfortable. Is she reckless? Absolutely. But is it random? Not really. Once you understand that the capital already destroyed her safety net, her sarcasm starts to read as strategy. If you can't protect your family, why pretend the system still has any promise to offer you? We're going to cover more of this pattern with other victors. But Johanna is the clearest case of someone who has stopped pretending to be grateful. She mentors. She does the required appearances. But she's openly hostile, constantly poking at the edges of what she can get away with. You can feel the question under everything she does. What are they going to do? Kill me too. Then the quarter quell answers that they don't kill her. Not yet. They capture her. In capital custody after the arena, Johanna is stripped, beaten, and tortured with water, weaponizing her fear of trees and electricity by shocking her whenever she's near them. It's sensory and psychological, the same way it is for Peter, but targeted to her specifically. When you see her again, she's bald, shaking, furious, and shattered. The sharp humor is still there, but it's buried under trauma. And here's the disturbing pattern. Haymitch, Finnick, Johanna, none of them are simply executed for defiance. They're broken slowly, turned into addicts, informants, unstable mentors, people the districts will pity or fear rather than follow. Why kill a rebel victor when you can turn them into a walking warning about what happens when you stop playing pretty? The real horror of Victor's village isn't that it fails to protect them, it's that it gives the capital a front row seat to their destruction. So if subtle defiance gets you that response, what happens when a victor's rebellion is loud, public, and televised to every district at once? Sex, parties, and propaganda, the capital's toolkit for owning victors' bodies. So if subtle defiance gets you beaten, drugged, and displayed, what happens when the rebellion isn't just loud but intimate? Not a speech, not a salute. Your body. This is where we talk about sex, parties, and propaganda as one connected system. Because winning the games doesn't just give the capital access to your image, it gives them access to you. Completely. At face value, those capital parties look like a reward. You're flown in, dressed up, handed endless food and glittering drinks. People laugh at your jokes, they ask you to twirl. On paper, you're a celebrity. But here's the real question. Why is every victor expected to stay late, keep drinking, keep smiling, and be available whenever an elite hand closes around their arm? We're going to cover the part the broadcasts never show. Finnick tells Katniss he was sold from the age of 14. That wasn't a one-off horror. That's a system. Multiple victors are coerced into prostitution, parceled out to high-ranking clients as if they were another capital luxury import. Say no, and Snow doesn't threaten you. He threatens your mother, your siblings, your entire district's already fragile food supply. That part matters because it turns every yes into a hostage negotiation. You might see a victor on a balcony, flirting, laughing, disappearing with someone rich. It reads as scandal, gossip, but under the surface there is a list of names and addresses in the districts that will suffer if they refuse. The relationship between victor and client is built on the quiet promise of violence, and it doesn't stop when the party ends. Propaganda appearances are the daytime version of the same trap. Interviews, victory tours, those scripted speeches where you're supposed to praise the games and the capital's mercy. Each one is a test. Will you cry on cue? Will you sell the story of hope Snow needs the districts to believe? Any deviation, any off-script moment becomes evidence of disloyalty. You see it with Katniss on her victory tour. One wrong sentence in District 11, one honest gesture, and the response is immediate. Public executions, tighter surveillance, direct threats delivered in her own living room. The message to every other victor is clear. The microphone is not yours. So where does consent even exist in that world? On camera, victors look willing. They wave from trains, blow kisses, toast the capital. Off camera, they're reminded that their families are traceable, their districts are bombable, their own bodies are rentable. When saying no can trigger a whipping in the square back home, can you really call anything a free choice? And this is where disobedience becomes truly dangerous. Refuse a client. Skip a party. Go off script in an interview. That's when the punishments get personal. Stripped status, targeted killings, psychological torture tailored to your specific fears. Why kill a rebel victor cleanly when you can make their suffering another performance? So if the capital owns the nights, the parties, and the cameras, what happens when a victor tries to turn those same stages into weapons against the regime? Addiction, isolation, madness. Breaking victors without firing a shot. What happens is quieter than an execution and way more useful to the capital. You don't just get punished. You get unraveled. This is where we talk about the victors everyone in Panem can point to and say, see? Winning makes you crazy. Haymitch, stumbling through District 12 with a bottle in his hand. The morphling addicts from District 6, so far gone they can barely function in the quarter quell. Johanna, stripped, tortured, shaking at the sound of water. Annie Cresta, brilliant in flashes, but held together by the thinnest thread. At face value, these are individual tragedies. But here's the real question. Why do the same patterns show up over and over again? There is a lot to uncover here. Start with addiction. The capital doesn't just tolerate it. It rolls out the red carpet. You win the games, and suddenly, there's endless alcohol on every train, morphling and painkillers for your nerves. Combine that with untreated trauma, survivor's guilt, and the knowledge that your victory killed 24 other children. And what's the easiest way to sleep at night? You numb it. The capital's not worried about Haymitch drinking himself into oblivion. That part matters because a drunk mentor misses things, slurs threats, forgets conversations. A sober, angry Haymitch is dangerous. A wasted one is a joke. Same with the District 6 morphlings. They're textbook examples of what happens when a victor realizes the games never end and decides they can't live fully awake anymore. The capital keeps the supply flowing. Why send peacekeepers when a bottle or a vial will do? Then there's isolation. Victor's village looks generous on paper. Big houses, full power, distance from the noise of the district. But walk through District 12's village in your head. Row after row of empty homes. Only Haymitch's decayed place, then Katniss and Peter moving in, rattling around in spaces meant for 12 families who never existed. You're set apart physically, literally on a hill. And socially, your district resents that you have more, depends on your rations, fears you and quietly blames you for not saving their child instead. So who do you talk to? Other victors are miles away. The only people who really understand what you've seen are either dead, drunk, high, or under surveillance. That's not luxury. That's a very pretty prison. And this is the reason it serves the capital so well. A victor dismissed as drunk, hysterical, or crazy Annie is easy to discredit. If Haymitch mutters about rigged arenas or Snow's threats, people roll their eyes. If Johanna rants about what the capital did to her, they say the torture broke her mind. The more visibly damaged you are, the easier it is for the regime to say, don't listen to them. The games did a number on their head. The cruelty is that none of this is framed as punishment, it's framed as reward. You're not being executed for defiance. You're being retired to comfort. The capital lets you live long enough to destroy yourself and calls it mercy. Winning the Hunger Games earns you a mansion in Victor's village. But what happens when a victor refuses to play that slow-motion death spiral and decides to weaponize their brokenness instead? Mentoring as quiet rebellion, how victors fight back from inside the system. So when a victor refuses to collapse on schedule, what can they actually do? You can't storm the capital. You can't refuse to show up on Caesar's couch. But you do have one strange, dangerous power the capital hands you every single year. They give you children. Mentoring, at face value, looks like another leash. You're paraded in front of the cameras, forced to smile, forced to pretend the games are a fair fight. But here's the real question. What happens when a victor stops treating mentoring as a job and starts treating it as a battlefield? Because this is one of the only spaces where a victor can still make strategic choices that change who lives and who dies. That part matters because the capital can script the interviews, but they can't quite script what happens in the training center, in those private sessions, in the advice you whisper on the rooftop at midnight. A mentor decides who to court for sponsors, who to push toward alliances, who to tell, hide, don't show off, survive the first bloodbath and disappear. That's a relationship the capital can't fully see, and victors know it. Now, we usually imagine mentors trying to help their tributes win, but there is a lot to uncover here if you flip the goal. What if winning isn't the kindest outcome? Some victors, especially the ones who've been prostituted out or turned into party toys, would know exactly what victory really costs. So you can imagine a mentor quietly training a tribute to die quickly and cleanly, steering them away from showy kills, away from capital attention, away from becoming the next Finnick O'Dare on a gilded leash. Is that cruelty or mercy? The capital would call it failure. A rebel would call it sabotage. And then you have the mentors who push in the opposite direction, not to protect the games, but to break them. This is where we talk about Haymitch in the Quarter Quell. On the surface, he's the drunk, the bad mentor, the reason District 12 never stands a chance. But once the rebellion is in motion, you realize he's been using that role to build alliances, trade favors, and in the third Quarter Quell, coordinate an extraction plan under the capital's nose. The arena becomes a board, and he's moving victors as pieces. Finnick weaponizes mentoring too, but through information. He's beloved in the capital, drenched in that false promise of glamour, and he uses it to collect secrets from powerful clients. Then he passes intel through Plutarch, through District 13, through anyone who can use it. Johanna, she's the anti-mentor, refusing to play nice, refusing to sell the narrative of hope the capital needs the districts to believe. Here's the twist the capital never intended. By forcing victors to travel, to network, to show up every year, they accidentally turned them into natural nodes in a rebellion network. Who else gets regular access to both the capital elite and terrified district families? Who else can carry messages, test loyalties, gather rumors about peacekeeper movements, and pass it on behind a smile on live television? So when we see bad mentors who don't try, who tank sponsor meetings, who mysteriously fail to secure weapons or medicine for their tributes, we have to ask, how many of them are actually saboteurs? How many are deliberately undermining the games, knowing the punishment will land on them, not the children? And if mentoring is already a quiet war, what happens when the capital finally realizes who's been fighting it? The Quarter Quell as mass punishment when victors become the targets. So what happens when the capital finally realizes who's been fighting that quiet war? They change the rules of the war. This is where we talk about the third Quarter Quell. On paper, the announcement sounds ceremonial. For the 75th games, the tributes will be reaped from the existing pool of victors. At face value, it's just another special twist in a long tradition of twists. But here's the real question. Why take the only people the capital has ever promised immunity to and throw them back in? Remember, the entire relationship between the games and the districts is built on that one promise. Win once, and you never go back. Your family gets food, your district gets celebrations, you get a mansion and supposed safety. The Quell rule exposes that as a lie in one sentence. If they can reclaim Katniss, they can reclaim anyone. Victory was never ownership for the victor. It was always ownership for the capital. And the timing is not an accident. By catching fire, victors aren't just traumatized celebrities. They're political problems. They mentor in ways that protect their own districts. They form alliances across district lines. They pass information on trains and in capital suites where peacekeepers can't hear everything. People in the districts watch them and see not just survivors, but symbols of what defiance can do. There is a lot to uncover here, because the capital suddenly has an entire class of citizens it can't fully script. So the Quell serves several purposes at once. It's punishment for the Haymitches who manipulated arenas, for the Finnicks who know too many secrets, for the Johannas who openly sneer at capital power. It's terror for the districts, a reminder that even the lucky ones can be dragged back into the bloodbath. And it's a purge, a clean way to thin out potential rebel leaders while pretending this is all just tradition. Look at who ends up in that arena. Finnick O'Dare, the capital's golden boy, who has been prostituted to the highest bidders and has blackmail material on half the regime. Johanna Mason, whose family was killed after she refused to play the pretty compliant victor and who has no reason left to behave. Beatty, the quiet genius from District 3, who understands technology, infrastructure, and how to break a system from the inside. These aren't random names. They're high-value threats. That part matters because it shows the Quell isn't just about Katniss. It's a mass punishment event aimed at an entire generation of victors who have seen too much and obey too little. The arena becomes a convenient execution chamber for anyone with subversive potential. And when you see it that way, Victor's village snaps into focus. It was never a sanctuary. It was a holding pen, a waiting room where the capital could watch its assets age, decide who was useful, and, when the balance tipped toward dangerous, write a new Quell card and send them back to the games. So if the Quell can rewrite the rules once, what does that say about every future promise the capital makes? Book versus movie. How adaptation choices soften or sharpen the horror. So if the Quell can rewrite the rules once, what does that say about every future promise the capital makes? To answer that, we need to zoom in on the version of Victor's village most people actually know, the movies, because at face value, that little cul-de-sac of mansions on screen looks almost cozy. Snow, pine trees, fresh paint. In the films, Victor's village is clean, quiet, and eerily pristine. You see Katniss stepping into this warm, polished house, appliances gleaming, fire in the hearth. The camera doesn't linger on cameras. You don't feel the rot in the walls. It sells the promise, win the games, and you get out of the seam forever. But here's the real question. Why does that movie version feel so different from the one you meet in the books? On the page, there is a lot to uncover here. Katniss keeps noticing the emptiness, the dust, the unused rooms. Haymitch's house is explicitly decayed, bottles everywhere, furniture wrecked. The village is powered and stocked while the rest of the district starves. But it's also haunted, half abandoned, and watched. This is where we talk about what gets toned down. The films hint at exploitation and torture, but they rarely show you the full system. Finnick's line about secrets in Mockingjay is chilling, sure, yet the books spell it out. He's prostituted to high-ranking capital clients for years. Johanna isn't just broken in a cell. She's been tortured with water, systematically stripped of everything that gave her hope. That part matters because it makes the relationship between Victor and Capital explicitly abusive, not just emotionally rough. On screen, those edges are sanded. Sexual exploitation becomes implication. Addiction is framed more as a character quirk than a weapon used against victors. The brutality of torture is mostly off-camera, pushed into suggestion. You're meant to infer the horror, not sit with every detail of it. So what gets emphasized instead? Loneliness. The films love the image of Katniss in that huge, silent house, calling out for Prim, wandering through empty rooms. Haymitch's drunkenness is front and center, almost theatrical. After the Quarter Quell, the village in Catching Fire and Mockingjay feels deserted, a ghost suburb with a single light on. The focus shifts from systemic abuse to emotional isolation, and that choice changes the story's center of gravity. In the books, you can build a legal case against the capital. Coerced prostitution, targeted torture, threats against families, surveillance embedded in the architecture. In the films, you feel the sadness first and the structure second. We're going to cover why that's such an effective cinematic move, but also why it lets the capital's worst crimes stay just out of frame. So here's the question for you. How different would these movies feel if you actually saw Finnick's clients or watched Johanna's torture as described on the page? Would Victor's village still read as a cursed luxury or as an open-air prison you can't unsee? Hold that thought, because next we're stepping into what the cameras never show, but every Victor lives through anyway. A day in the life of a free Victor. Surveillance, scripts, and silent threats. So imagine this. The cameras cut, the anthem fades, and the next time we see you, it's not in the arena. It's in a bed you didn't choose, in a mansion that echoes because no one else is allowed to live there. You wake up before dawn, not because you want to, but because the house is too quiet. No siblings arguing, no miners clattering past, just the hum of capital tech in the walls. First move isn't breakfast, it's checking the sleek little communicator on your table. Any new messages from the capital, any requests that are really orders. One unread ping from your handler is enough to spike your heart rate more than any mutt ever did. You glance out the window. The streets of Victor's village are empty, but you know the peacekeepers are there, stationed just beyond the gate or patrolling the road that no one from your district is allowed to walk. At face value, they're there to protect you, the precious Victor. But here's the real question. Why does a supposedly free citizen need armed guards to go buy bread? This is where we talk about the daily schedule that owns you. Mid-morning, a hovercraft or car takes you to the training center. You're mentoring, which sounds noble until you remember what it really is. Walking 2 more children from your district toward the same arena that broke you. You run drills, you give advice, you pretend there's hope. The reason you show up on time isn't duty. It's because Snow has already proven what happens when a Victor refuses to play along. After that, the script kicks in harder. You have scheduled interviews, propaganda spots, maybe a quick segment reacting to the latest games twist. Before every appearance, a prep team and a handler cycle through the same ritual. They hand you talking points. They remind you which memories are off limits. They underline the one line about how generous the capital has been. And then, very softly, they mention your mother's new roof or your cousin's medicine. That part matters because it turns every sentence into a hostage negotiation. Here's the pattern interrupt. Disobedience, for most Victors, doesn't start with a speech. It starts with a pause. You answer a capital message a little slower than you should. You forget one flattering adjective about President Snow. On camera, you slip in a word only your district would notice. An old song title, a plant name from home, a phrase that sounds harmless in capital standard but carries a different meaning in your dialect. We're going to cover the big rebellions later, but there is a lot to uncover here in the tiny ones. Haymitch, subtly steering strong tributes toward each other. Finnick, smuggling secrets in whispers. Johanna dragging her feet just enough to annoy the wrong people. Every night, you end where you started, in that silent mansion, replaying the day. Which smile was too sharp? Which hesitation too obvious? You ask yourself the same question over and over. Did I push far enough to live with myself, but not so far that they'll kill everyone I love? The games are over, but the relationship between survival and conscience resets every morning, and you go to sleep knowing one wrong word could turn Victor's village from a quiet prison into a smoking ruin. Designing the unseen villages, how each district's version probably works. So if one wrong word can turn your street into ash, what does that street actually look like beyond District 12? At face value, Victor's village is one standardized capital product. 12 houses, a square. But here's the real question. If the games are tailored to each district's fears, why wouldn't the villages be tailored to their obedience? This is where we talk about district types, because Panem is not one-size-fits-all misery. Start with the career districts. 1, 2, and 4. Their villages are probably the most populated, the most social, the closest thing you get to a functioning neighborhood. You can imagine District 2's stone villas clustered near the training centers, or District 4's sea-facing mansions with private docks. Children grow up knowing the victors by name, watching them train new tributes in open courtyards. On the surface, that looks glamorous, but that part matters because the more visible the victor, the tighter the leash. In loyal districts, defiance is handled quietly. A mentor who gets sick, a boat that never returns, a victor whose face just stops appearing on broadcasts. Then you move to the industrial mid-tier, 3, 5, and 6. These villages are probably half-empty developments on the district edges, rows of identical houses with only a few windows lit at night. The factories and power plants are always humming in the distance, a reminder of where you came from and where you'll never have to work again. That's the promise, right? Escape from the line. But the relationship with your neighbors is poisoned. They see your full pantry while their kids are still in the reaping. You see their resentment every time you walk to the train. There is a lot to uncover here. Victors in these districts are pressured by capital handlers to perform loyalty on camera, but off camera they're isolated, stuck between a population that hates them and peacekeepers who treat them as potential saboteurs. Now zoom out to the agricultural districts 9, 10, 11, and the extraction and poverty zones 7, 8, 12. The contrast gets brutal. In 11, you can imagine white-columned victor houses overlooking endless fields where children pick grain under the watchtowers. In 7, timber mansions framed by forests, stripped bare. In 8, pristine homes pressed up against textile tenements and smoke. The message is viciously simple. The games can lift one of you out, so why rebel when you could be the exception? But envy curdles fast. Victors here aren't just admired, they're hated for surviving a system everyone else is still trapped in. So when disobedience happens in these districts, the punishment flips. Snow doesn't just erase the victor, he makes an example of their people. Public executions, floggings in the square, peacekeeper raids on the very streets the victor grew up on. You don't just fear for your own life, you fear being the reason your entire district pays. So how do you live in a mansion that doubles as a bullseye? In the next section, we're going to cover what happens when those quiet tensions finally explode. When the cameras turn off, torture, interrogation, and the capital's black sites. So what happens when that pressure finally snaps and a victor really does say no? You don't just lose your mansion, you disappear. This is where we talk about Johanna and Peter, because they show you the two paths the capital keeps waiting in the dark. Both are taken after the quarter quell. Both are dragged off those hovercrafts, not as heroes, but as property being returned to its owner. And once the cameras turn off, the real games begin. Johanna's route is blunt. She's stripped, shaved, electrocuted, and water tortured in a capital facility that's probably half hospital, half prison. You hear the edges of it in Mockingjay, her terror of water, the way she shakes when the power flickers. At face value, it looks random and sadistic. But here's the real question. Why invest that much effort into breaking someone you could just execute? That part matters because Snow doesn't just want a dead victor. He wants a reusable warning. Joanna comes back to District 13 so damaged she can barely hold an axe. Every rebel who sees her understands the message. The capital can reach inside your mind and rearrange you. And if they did that to a career victor from a strong district, what could they do to you? Peter's path is colder, clinical. He's taken to what is essentially a black site psych lab, buried somewhere in the capital's medical system. No public trial, no spectacle, just a closed door and a team of doctors with tracker-jacker venom. We're going to cover hijacking more in a second, because there is a lot to uncover here. Hijacking weaponizes everything the Capitol already knows about fear. They lace Peter with venom, then replay and rewrite his memories until the girl he once volunteered to save becomes the thing he's programmed to kill. It's torture plus propaganda plus science. The Capitol doesn't have to invent a new villain. It can simply turn a beloved victor into a living booby trap aimed at his own allies. So where do they do this? You're probably not running full psychological warfare out of a standard detention block. The books hint at secure Capitol hospitals, locked psychiatric wings, maybe even underground research centers tied to game maker tech. These are the places where victors are interrogated, catalogued, and then rebuilt as tools. Peter as the hijacked assassin, Joanna as the broken cautionary tale, Finnick as the exploited party secret keeper. And notice how this escalates the original promise of Victor's Village. Winning was supposed to mean you never faced the arena again. Now the threat is, you can be taken from your perfect kitchen straight into a room where your memories are the arena. Every mentor session, every tense phone call with the Capitol sits under that shadow. Step out of line, and you don't just suffer. You might come back serving their script. So if even victors can be turned into weapons, what does that do to the districts that once pinned all their hope on them? Living warnings. How broken victors keep the districts in line. Because once you see victors as weapons, you have to flip the angle. They're also billboards aimed back at the districts. At face value, Victor's Village is an advertisement for the promise of winning. Big houses, full pantries, hot water whenever you want. Every child in the district grows up staring at those roofs and thinking, if I survive the games, that's mine. But here's the real question. What happens when those same children also watch the people in those houses fall apart in public? This is where we talk about Haymitch staggering through the square, drunk before noon. On paper, he's proof the system works. The lone victor of District 12, immune from the reaping, living in a mansion. In practice, his body is a walking poster for what the arena does to you and what the Capitol lets you become if you won't play nice. The reason his addiction is tolerated, even televised, is that it sends a double message. You could live like him if you win. You could end up exactly like him if you ever step out of line. The Capitol understands this relationship between spectacle and fear. When Johanna comes back from torture, shaking, bald, stripped of the one thing she loved, her trees, that part matters because everyone can see her. She's paraded on TV, used in propaganda, then discarded where the cameras might still catch a breakdown. Ever wondered why so many victors are addicts, recluses, or called crazy? That's not an accident. That's programming. So how do the districts absorb this? Parents don't just whisper about the reaping anymore. They warn their kids about what happens if a victor talks back, refuses an order, hesitates on camera. Win, keep your head down. Don't be another Haymitch. Don't be another Johanna. Fear of the arena blends into fear of survival after the arena. The games stretch across your entire life. Over time, those warnings harden into folklore. We're going to cover how each district probably has its own stories. The mentor who vanished after insulting a Capitol escort. The victor who came home with scars that didn't match any known mutt. Back then, rebellion stories were about uprisings and mass punishments. Now, the horror tales are smaller, more intimate. One winner, one punishment, one family destroyed, and somehow that feels even more inevitable. Pattern interrupt. Snow doesn't actually want every rebel dead. He wants some of them breathing, because a dead rebel is a martyr. A broken rebel is a warning. Snow's long-term strategy is to keep just enough victors alive, just visible enough that their suffering does the daily work of control. You don't need peacekeepers on every corner when the most famous person in your district is proof that the capital can own you forever. And once the quarter quell rips away even the illusion of safety for victors, that billboard changes again. So what happens when the warning backfires and those broken billboards start to inspire rebellion instead of obedience? Would you rebel? The moral math of a victor under threat? So put yourself on the other side of that broken billboard. You're not watching a victor on a screen. You are the victor. Here's the real question. When the warning backfires and turns into a spark, what do you actually do with that spark when President Snow has a knife on everyone you love? Walk through one concrete scenario. You have a surviving sibling back in your district. They live in a crumbling house that only has power because you keep winning favor in the capital. One night, Snow's people give you a request. Spend the night with a capital client, or your sibling has an accident in the mines tomorrow. At face value, it's a choice. In reality, it's a script with your family's blood as the ink. So what do you do? If you say no, you're heroic, and your sibling dies. If you say yes, you survive. But at what point does self-preservation become complicity? How many of those nights, those parties, those propaganda specials can you endure before you stop feeling coerced and start feeling like part of the machine that sold you? This is where we talk about moral math under a dictatorship. Every victor is doing constant calculations. If I smile on Caesar's couch, maybe my district avoids a food cut. If I mentor strategically, maybe I keep my tributes out of the bloodbath. There is a lot to uncover here, because the capital doesn't just own your body, it owns the equation you use to decide what good even means. So imagine the spectrum of resistance. On one end, quiet sabotage. You pull a Haymitch, coaching tributes to expose arena flaws, slipping them advice that makes the games harder to control. You drink too much, you play the fool, but you're always watching for a crack in the system. The punishment? Your loved ones are murdered, and you're left alive as proof of the cost of cleverness. Move a little further. You go the Finnick route, weaponizing the very abuse used against you. You trade secrets you learned in capital beds, leak names to rebels, turn pillow talk into blackmail. Every whisper is resistance, but every appearance at a party is also propaganda. Are you fighting back, or just decorating the cage more tastefully? Further still, you're Johanna. You stop pretending. You snarl on camera, you refuse to play nice, you ally openly with rebels in the quarter quell. The capital's response is torture, memory stripping, and the quiet erasure of everyone who ever cared about you. That part matters because it shows the end point of open defiance. You might keep your soul, but you lose almost everything else. Would you bury your rage under jokes with Haymitch, turn your trauma into leverage like Finnick, burn every bridge like Johanna, or play along completely and convince yourself that mentoring well is enough resistance? We're going to cover what those choices add up to in the end, because understanding this moral math is the only way to answer the final question of the series. In Panem, what does victory actually mean? The illusion of freedom, what winning actually means in Panem. So when you add up all those choices, Haymitch's bitter jokes, Finnick's weaponized charm, Johanna's open rage, you start to see the pattern. Winning the Hunger Games doesn't set you free. It just changes the rules of the prison. At face value, Victor's Village is the happy ending. You get a house, steady food, hot water, a direct line to the capital. No more reaping, no more tesserae, no more coal dust in your lungs. But here's the real question. If you're so free, why does every door in that mansion open onto the capital's shadow? Why does every reward come stapled to a contract you never really got to refuse? This is where we talk about the full journey. Snow designs Victor's Village as bait, then locks it in with paperwork, handlers, and schedules. You're a victor, but you're also state property. You mentor, when they say. If you're lucky, you get the Finnick treatment, paraded at parties, sold to high-ranking clients, your body turned into another arena. If you're defiant, you get Haymitch's fate. Loved ones murdered, surveillance tightened, addiction quietly encouraged until you're a walking warning label for your district. That part matters because it exposes the core paradox of Panem. The promise is simple: survive the games and you escape the reaping forever. In reality, you trade one cage for another. The old cage has barbed wire and peacekeepers. The new one has wine cellars and polished floors. You're not starving anymore, but you're never unobserved. You can walk through the square without fear of your name being drawn, but you can't say no when snow calls at midnight with a request. And this isn't just fantasy dystopia. It's how real authoritarian systems work. You reward a tiny group, war heroes, star athletes, party loyalists, with apartments, cars, special rations. Then you keep them on a short leash so everyone else sees the relationship between obedience and survival. Step out of line, and the regime doesn't always kill you. It kills your career, your reputation, your family. In Panem, that's Finnick's secrets, Johanna's dead loved ones, the threat hanging over Katniss's mother and Prim every time she hesitates. So the games never really end, the arena just changes shape. Instead of mutts and fireballs, you're dodging interviews, party invitations, and Snow's veiled threats. Every mentoring season is another round. Every tour, stop another trap. You win by keeping your district alive one more year, or by slipping a subversive word past the censors. Some victors sabotage quietly, some ally with rebels, some just try to endure. But they're all still playing, which brings us to the final twist. In Panem, surviving the games isn't true victory at all. True victory would mean breaking the system that defines you as a victor in the first place. So how do you win a game that's rigged into every law, every camera, every feast in the capital? That's the question the story is about to answer. Your turn in the village. Which victor's fate haunts you most? So if the story is really asking how you win a rigged game, here's the real question for you. If you woke up tomorrow in a victor's village mansion, whose life are you actually stepping into? Haymitch, stumbling past empty bottles in District 12, knowing the capital murdered everyone he ever cared about because he outsmarted their arena twist? Finnick, adored by the capital on camera, while being sold off to its elite the second the lights go off. Johanna, walking past the ghost of her family every time she looks at a tree because they were killed for her refusing to play the sweet, harmless girl. Which of those fates feels worse to you? Or is it Annie's, trapped in a loop where the games never ended? Or some obscure victor we barely meet on the page, whose entire district treats them as both hero and walking curse? At face value, they all won. In practice, each one is a different answer to the same brutal question: what does the capital do to a victor who won't behave? This is where we talk about you for a second. Be honest. If you were in Finnick's position, would you rebel and risk your family, your district, everyone Snow can reach? Or would you play along, smile for the cameras, mentor the next set of doomed kids, and tell yourself that staying alive is the only way to protect them? There is a lot to uncover here about why certain choices feel braver in theory than they would in a capital contract room. So I want you to pick a victor. Any district, any era. Drop into their house in the village and walk us through one normal day. Do they pace the perimeter counting cameras before breakfast? Do they avoid the shower because the steam reminds them of arena fog? Do they sit by the phone dreading the next call from the capital, or scroll through old games footage, trying to understand the person they became to survive? Tell us your headcanon. What's the exact moment, making tea or cleaning a weapon or feeding geese in District 10 when they remember the games haven't actually ended. That part matters because it turns the village from a prize into a pressure cooker, and it shows us the real relationship between victory and freedom in Panem. And if you're into this kind of deep dive, stay with us. We're going to cover individual victors in future episodes. Full breakdowns of Haymitch's routine, Finnick's appointments, Johanna's training, even a series where we design each district's victor's village based on its industry, architecture, and the capital's propaganda needs. Think of the comments as our own meta-victor's village, a place where you can dissect these systems, argue over whose fate is worst, and test your own moral limits without Snow listening in. Probably. What we still don't know, open questions and future theories. And here's the uncomfortable thing we have to sit with. For all the detail we get about Katniss, Peter, Finnick, Johanna, even Haymitch, the world of Victor's village is still mostly shadows and empty doorways. At face value, winning the games earns you a mansion, a pension, and a permanent escape from the reaping. But here's the real question. What are you legally after that? Are you a citizen of your district, a ward of the capital, or property on a very pretty leash? We never see a contract, never hear about a clause that lets a victor refuse mentoring, refuse an interview, refuse to get on the train. The cameras cut away right where the paperwork would start. And then there's the darker math. We know the capital tortures, disappears, and re-educates people constantly. So how many victors were quietly executed off-page for pushing too far, for saying no one too many times, for inspiring the wrong kind of hope in their district? We see what happens to Cinna for one dress. Imagine 10, 20, 50 victors who didn't have Katniss's plot armor. There is a lot to uncover here, and the gaps are almost more revealing than the scenes we do get. Post-rebellion, those questions don't suddenly go away. They just change shape. How does the new Panem treat victors who were both victims and collaborators under duress? Does a former escort of capital clients get tried as a criminal or recognized as a survivor of trafficking? Does a mentor who played up the romance narrative on camera get blamed for propaganda or forgiven because the alternative was a bullet for their family? This is where we talk about justice that has to make room for coercion, brainwashing, and the fact that the games trained people to weaponize their own trauma. And what about the victors we never meet? The anonymous woman from District 5, who maybe spent 20 years subtly training her tributes to break arena cameras, to waste sponsor gifts, to make the show boring. The quiet man from District 9, who always pushed his tributes towards alliances with known rebels, hoping one of them would survive long enough to matter. How many tiny acts of sabotage died with them, never recorded in Caesar Flickerman's highlight reels? So here's a pattern interrupt for you. Every empty house in Victor's village is basically a crime scene and a confession booth in one. Someone lived there, someone stopped living there. The capital has a reason for both. I want to know which of those missing stories you're most obsessed with. Is it a forgotten victor from a non-career district? A whole district's village after the war, half abandoned, half museum? Tell me which unseen victor, which district, which form of post-games punishment or resistance you want us to build an entire episode around. Because we're going to cover those hypotheticals as seriously as canon. That part matters because every untouched plate, every powered but empty kitchen in those houses is a narrative the books never got to tell. And this channel is where those stories get imagined, pulled apart, and used to ask one last question. When the games end, who actually gets to stop playing? Stepping out of the arena, final thoughts from Victor's village. When you walk back out of those powered but empty kitchens, here's the real question. If every untouched house is a story that never got told, what happens to the stories we did see? The victors who dared to say no even once and found out what the Capitol really meant by winning, because that's the central twist of Victor's Village. Winning the Hunger Games doesn't free you, it just changes the shape of your chains. You trade the arena's open violence for contracts, bodyguards, direct phone lines to the Capitol, and a life where every choice is already scripted. At face value, you're rich, safe, important. But that part matters because the moment you pull away from the script, the real punishment starts. The Capitol doesn't usually kill disobedient victors first. It kills everything around them. Haymitch wins with a stunt Snow can't control. His loved ones are murdered. Finnick becomes a Capitol favorite. He's prostituted out to powerful clients, and anyone he cares about is leverage. Johanna refuses to sell herself as a pretty Capitol pet. Her family disappears. Why torture one body when you can torture an entire life? This is where we talk about targeted suffering as policy. You get the sexual exploitation, the party appearances, the propaganda tours under guard. You get addiction seeded and maintained. Haymitch's alcohol, morphling for other victors, because a medicated victor is easier to manage than a martyr. You get isolation in those big empty houses, a whole district visible from your window, but no real relationship to it anymore. And when you finally break, that brokenness is televised as a warning. There is a lot to uncover here about narrative design. Collins doesn't stop at the arena because authoritarian power doesn't stop at the arena. The games are a spectacle, but the long game is what happens after. The Capitol needs its winners to prove that the system works, then quietly corrupts those same winners until they're either obedient billboards or living horror stories. Why is that so effective? Because it tells every watching child in every district, even if you win, you belong to us. And yet, buried in that, you still see rebellion. Haymitch mentors to break the system that broke him. Finnick leaks secrets. Johanna refuses to play soft. Their resistance is messy, traumatized, often self-destructive. But it exposes Snow's long-term strategy. Victors are supposed to be the Capitol's greatest promise. And instead, they become its greatest indictment. So as we step back out of Victor's Village, carry this lens with you. Ask where reward and punishment are manufacturing consent in other stories you love, and in the real systems you live inside. When does a prize start to look more like a cage? When does hope become a leash? If this breakdown hit you, share it with someone who still thinks winning means escape. And stay tuned, because next time we're going to cover one specific victor's full post-games timeline and follow every chain the Capitol tried to wrap around them.